Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Michael Totaro.
and today we're going to talk about something. It's so cool because, Mike, you brought this up a while ago, and we haven't had a chance to discuss it, but you were interested in sharing some thoughts on the intellectual life. And, right off the bat, that might turn some people away. Please don't. You really need to stay put, because this is actually very exciting, especially for us Dominicans, but for everybody. Because as I did a little bit of searching, and I looked up a video on Godsplaining about the intellectual life, and Father Bonaventure and Father Gregory Pine, who will be here soon at Our Lady of Wisdom for a presentation, so look into that if you're interested. They were discussing this, and the thing that really got me was that the thing that makes us like God, because we are created in the image and likeness of God, is our intellect. And sometimes people kind of, I hate to say poo-poo the intellect or say, oh, that's just, but it's really important that we exercise that capacity, because that is our capacity to be more like God. And that's really, it's really important. And Father Bonaventure said, like animals are very likely to strike with their claws and their teeth and, through the senses, but we can strike out with our mind and learn. And these things it's amazing and exciting. And so let's dive into a little more about what inspired you to think about this topic to begin with, Mike.
Well, yeah, Cheryl, of course, one of the four pillars for Dominicans is that of study. Not as an in itself, but as a means to come to know, truth, of course, to draw ever closer to the truth. And so the intellectual life, and so I'm glad you sort of made mention of, like, please don't turn away from, change your dial or whatever. So when we speak about the intellectual life in the sacred sense, we're not talking about something that we do in order to become smart. It is something that we do that can be a sacred and holy activity that draws us ever closer to God, because, as you correctly stated, God gave us reason, and we do have intellect. He would not give us anything that we should not use, and intellect is one of those that we should use. And so this book, I read it for the first time some years ago, and it's by Father Serdelange. He was a French Dominican friar, and I don't quite remember sometime in the 20th century. And his book, The Intellectual Life, is an entirely Thomistic work. And it's based upon St. Thomas Aquinas' 16 precepts for acquiring the treasure of knowledge. Now, if St. Thomas Aquinas is going to, compose a work entitled 16 Precepts for Acquiring the Treasure of Knowledge, that speaks volumes, right? So knowledge is important. And so Father Serdelange basically indicates that, quote, "It is priceless. We should like to imprint its every word in the inmost being of the Christian thinker," end quote.
Oh, that's great.
Well, and what's also interesting, what Father, of course, being a Dominican, really impresses upon the, like you said, Mike, the balance of prayer and study, which, are the wings to contemplation, I think someone said. And one of the aspects of or quotes that I think he's famous for, and I think it might even be in this book, it's he referred to being intelligent in terms of the intellectual will and intellectual life can escape the sad effects of age. So what he was referring to is that if you want to grow old and be graceful and dive into the intellectual life. And I think, Mike, you really hit on a point. It's not being smart. It's not filled with knowledge per se. And even though like Mike, you said, this is a spiritual work. Of course, he was a philosopher, a theologian. There's a lot of practical aspects because even in our secular world, you can look at the importance of finding that space to to really fulfill what intellectual life you want to have. And I think the importance of that for today is that you finding that space, finding that time, because you want to fill it with good things. Cheryl, you mentioned God gave us the grace and wisdom of intellect and free will. Well, what are we doing with that? And I think this is a wonderful work that all can really read and take a deeper dive into that, because it's really important, for us on looking at, constantly reading, constantly learning. And of course, in this day of, social media and whatnot, how are we spending our time? Should be spending our time 20 minutes reading a very, good book, or an hour death scrolling and, seeing what the latest is in politics. So Mike, I know I'm really excited to learn more about this book.
Well, Father Sertalange, Father Sertalange writes, the athletes of the mind, like those of the playing field, must be prepared for privations, long training, a sometimes superhuman tenacity. We must give ourselves from the heart if the truth is to give itself to us. Truth serves only its slaves. As a result, we cannot pursue the intellectual life for any other purpose.
And that's great. That purpose, that intention is really important. If you're doing it so that you can go win Trivial Pursuit at the next party that you go to, then that's not quite the right intention, right? It should flow out of prayer and out of love of, like you said, my truth. And that's the difference between, and they distinguish this very well in Godsplaining, between studiositas and curiositas. Curiositas will give you on the scrolling through, memes and things that just don't have any substantial matter to them, not true learning and truth itself. That is one of the, traps of this. Do not fall into curiositas, but studiositas, which is studying for the sake of truth, will find you delving deeper into things that are higher, that are leaning towards God, that should come from our prayer life as well.
Yes. And in fact, along those lines, Father Sertalange makes sort of connection in terms of the intellectual life between purity of thought and purity of soul. And he writes, purity of thought requires purity of soul. Knowledge involves everything in us. We think with our whole being. So it's not just not just an activity that we do just for the sake of doing it. And of course, speaking for myself, I know that there have been many times in my life where I have kind of, frivolously sort of read a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And when I say a little bit of this and a little bit of that, I'm speaking about those works that are really not worth spending a whole lot of time with. It's, they're not bad, but they're just they're sort of pointless. They don't draw me, they don't lift me up, right? They don't help me to grow in virtue and holiness. And so he really emphasizes throughout the entire book, and I want to, by the way, Jeff, thank you for mentioning that this book is absolutely, truly approachable. It is not a complicated read at all. And in fact, it's just a very nice, it's got a lot of substance to it, but it is a very comfortable and enjoyable read. And you know that it's all for the purpose of allowing God to draw, you closer to himself.
And again, God gave us this intellect to exercise it. It will atrophy. It just like your muscles do when you don't use them and you don't work out. And also a recommendation for, getting started in the intellectual life that a couple of the priests were talking about in Godsplaining is that you first of all get your prayer life on a daily basis. That's the most important thing, and then after that, and flowing from that, hopefully, will come the things that I think, ask God in prayer. There's a lot of stuff. I recently talked to a young girl who was like, I want to just know a lot of stuff. I don't know where to begin. And I'm like, take it to prayer. Ask God. Begin with that. And when you walk out with a desire to learn more with that intention, that purified intention, you'll know where to begin. But also, just like when you go to work out, you're not going to start with 250-pound bench presses, right? You're going to start a little bit lighter. You want something challenging, but you don't want to just have to walk away from it not understanding anything. So begin with something that challenges you, but doesn't bury you, I guess, with too much lofty wording and so forth. But
you're right. And in that spirit of prayer, he speaks to that, the spirit of prayer, and he writes, that we must cultivate in the intellectual work that we want to engage in. We want to incorporate the spirit of prayer within that, and in fact, he writes, when we neglect the spiritual life for the sake of study, this is an abuse and a fool's game. To suppose that it will further our progress and enrich our production is to say that the stream will flow better if its springs are dried up.
Mm. Yeah, so how would this look in practicality? I thought it might be a question to some people. It's going to look a million different ways, for each person. But one example, just recently, I was reading Living in the Divine Will by Daniel O'Connor, which is a wonderful book. It's a very easy... I'm just reading like 3 pages a day for my own spiritual prayer life. So it launches me into some prayer, my prayer time. Within that, he had quoted Pope John Paul II in his encyclical on Fidei Depositum, I think is the name, but it's the deposit of faith. Mm-hmm. And when he presented the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I think is a momentous gift to our church. And so I immediately, one of the things I'm like, I'm going to have to look this up. You want to go study more. Like I heard that quote. That's amazing. I pray for the deposit of faith, but I didn't realize there was an encyclical or that had come out with this presentation of the catechism. And so it was really exciting because, it leads you down. It's sort of like God leads you into this. That's just one example. There's so many others. It could lead you to learning another language if you want to speak another language, because I love praising God in different languages, because you just can't find enough words in one language to love our Lord in. So currently I'm trying to do more American Sign Language because we have parishioners at St. Patrick's that are in the deaf community, and I want to pass that barrier and be able to communicate our faith and share other things. So it's a work in progress. I'm not very good at it, but I went to one of their worship sessions, and it was so great to worship in sign language because it's just another way to express our love for God.
Exactly.
So these are just examples.
And you mentioned the practicality. How do we make this happen, right?
Right.
And so he actually has a chapter entitled "The Organization of Life." So the book not only just, it's not just simply a philosophical kind of, narrative about the intellectual life and why it's important. It is that, but he gives very practical advice on how that can happen for each of us. First thing he points out is simplify your life. Simplification. He said, that society life is fatal to study. Well, Lord, Jeff, you alluded to social media. We're living it day in and day out, bombarded, right? And so we have to simplify our life. And so don't be too quick to turn the radio on or pick up your smart or whatever it is, those kinds of distractions. So simplicity is the first. The second is solitude. He writes that solitude enables you to make contact with yourself, a necessity if you want to realize yourself, not to repeat like a parrot a few acquired formulas, but to be the prophet of the God who is within you, who speaks a unique language to each man. And then he writes, Jesus shows us truly that one can be entirely recollected and entirely devoted to others entirely given to men and living entirely in God. In other words, we can turn to the Scriptures, look to the Gospels in particular. Our Lord Jesus Christ gives us the pattern to follow. Not that we are ever really informed that our Lord is spending time in study, certainly in a lot of prayer, time spent in prayer during the night. But we also know that we were told that he, grew in wisdom and knowledge, and so of course that speaks to his human nature, which would be another segment, I suppose. And also, St. Thomas Aquinas devotes 7 of his 16 precepts to solitude, both exterior and interior.
You're listening to Christ Our King Catholic Radio for Acadiana. This is 90.5 FM and 99.5 FM and 1230 AM. We are your show, Studium to Studio. We are your Third Order, your lay Dominicans here in Lafayette, Louisiana, and we're brought to you every Thursday, 4 p.m., thanks to Stein Lumber with the locations throughout all of Acadiana. And we are talking about the intellect and the intellectual life, which is, doesn't really have to be too complicated unless you make it that way. And if you do, then I guess you could say you're losing the point. So, we're talking about, trying to obtain the intellectual life for you and for me. And I think we mentioned you could look at it a million different people and a million different ways to get there. But for me, in looking at whether I, was going to become a Dominican, I looked at it as, maybe this is the only way I'm going to be able to get to heaven if I do this, because it forces me in a good way to expand my intellectual will. I don't know if I would be reading 3 Ages of Interior Life by Father Garrigou Lagrange unless, I was a Dominican. I mean, we are reading, some of them are easy reads, some of them are very difficult reads, going through each question in the Summa. It's challenging, and of course it should be challenging. And we want to thank God for that challenge because he gave us the opportunity to have that ability. To expand our intellectual will, which of course should always lead us to prayer.
It's interesting because we're all unique and individual. We all come to, to the place where we are spiritually in different ways. But Jeff just mentioned that for him, he likes that challenge in front of him to read. For me, I loved reading all these challenging books, but nobody around me really cared to talk to me about it. For some reason, I'm reading the Summa and I'm taking notes, and that's another recommendation that they gave that I'd really tell everybody as a good recommendation. When you're reading some of the things, just write down a little bit about what you learned, because even if it was just a little bit, it'll help you to retain that. But I was reading through the Summa when I came upon the lay Dominican group, and it was great to have people who actually wanted to talk about that. Mm-hmm. So we all came here in different reasons, but it's a great. Not only is it great, I love being a Dominican, and study is part of our charism, but I think that every Christian, no matter if you're a lay Dominican or not, every Catholic should be exercising their intellectual life. So it is a gift from God.
You mentioned that you should be doing that. And in some cases, I don't want to say it's a sin if you're not doing that, but you're basically telling God, you gave me this talent, I'm going to kind of toss it off to the side, and I'll get to it when I want to get to it. That's a dangerous thought there. So, we want to look at all the gifts that God has given us, especially, this one. And we do have an obligation to, expand our intellectual will to the best of our ability.
So what both of you have just spoken to really kind of as a nice segue into his next practical point, with respect to the intellectual life, and he basically emphasizes the cooperation with one. His wording is one's fellow, so you have to look at the time context. But basically, what he writes is importance of association and cooperating with well-chosen friends, mutual teaching, and mutual support. He goes on to say that you develop a good group of friends. Friendship is an obstetric art. It draws out our richest and deepest resources. It unfolds the wings of our dreams and hidden, indeterminate thoughts. It serves as a check on our judgments, tries out our new ideas, keeps up our ardor, and inflames our enthusiasm. And that goes right to what you were saying, Cheryl, with the, you were already reading, when you came upon at that time, our group, our lay Dominican group, you were already reading the Summa. And then, lo and behold, the Lord brought you to this place and these individuals, and myself as being one of those, and we had this sort of common desire,
Oh, the Holy Spirit is so good, because Mike, when you told me about doing this again, you had suggested the intellectual life as a topic for one of our episodes on Studium to Studio, and it wasn't a day or two later, I think. So it was January 2nd when I was listening to the officer readings. And the officer readings was, in the second reading, was Saint Nazianzian was giving a sermon and sharing about his friendship with Saint Basil. And I'd love to read just a little bit about what he said, because it follows what you said so well. So this is Saint Nazianzian talking about Saint Basil. Such was the prelude to our friendship, the kindling of the flame that was to bind us together, when in the course of time we acknowledge our friendship and recognize that our ambition was a life of true wisdom. And then he goes on to say, the same hope inspired us, the pursuit of learning. This is an ambition especially subject to envy. This will bring us into another topic, by the way, a pitfall. You got to be careful. Yet between us, there was no envy. On the contrary, we made capital out of our rivalry. Our rivalry consisted not in seeking the first place for oneself, but in yielding it to the other, for we each looked on the other's success as his own. And then, of course, they attributed that success to God, to the glory of God the Father. I just thought he expressed that so well, and then you're, referring that also to our friendship that we have in our group, which is just a beautiful summary.
And in fact, we talk about this quite often during our monthly meetings, but also just in discussion. And each of us has our family, but we also have our Dominican family. And we are truly a family, and just like any family, we may have some different points of view at certain times, but we are all very respectful. And I speaking for myself, I always, by the grace of God, because I'm a lay Dominican, I'm reminded that I made a perpetual promise, and that's not just they're not just not words, but it's a promise that I made in the presence of God in His holy church, and I can say that it makes me less of a crummy person, day in and day out. It really does.
Both of you were talking about making wise choices in terms of friends and whatnot, and I guess to just put it on a level that we all can understand that if you wanted to learn something, and you wanted to bring 5 people to dinner, you want to bring the 5 people that really know an awful lot. And so because you're going to be able to surround yourself with good people and learn something from them. And it's just like, unfortunately, with a group of friends, unfortunately, if you have a group of friends and if you have one that is a troublemaker or maybe kind of brings people down, that has a much more impact on that entire group. So, I think what Father is saying is that, choose your books wisely, choose your friends wisely. And, all boats rise, of course, when you're all in it together, just like with our St. Albert the Great chapter. But you want to raise yourself to that next level. You want to do that intellectually. You want to do it spiritually. I mean, we all talk about sports. We want to, raise ourselves to the next level, whether it's, football, tennis, and basketball or whatever. But we want to do that very same thing, more importantly, on the spiritual and intellectual level.
So any final thoughts to inspire people on developing their intellectual life?
Well, I suppose the best advice I can offer, recommendation, pick up a copy of the book. Even the paperback is pretty inexpensive. You can order it through your local Catholic bookstore, online. It is available in digital for those who prefer that sort of format. But it really is a book worth reading at least once, but probably more than once.
And even if you don't read the book, you can begin living, that intellectual life. You can start implementing some of the things, just setting aside some time, like you all were saying, making space, making time for that. It follows really well after our recent read on leisure and the idea that how important leisure is and how much it's been lost by our society in this day and age. So
Father Sertalange also devotes an entire chapter 4, to the time of work. And so we have a certain time, most of us at least have a certain time where, it's our prayer time. And so Father Sertalange indicates there should be a continuity of work. And so he writes, studies of prayer to truth. So just as we can pray at all times, since prayer is desire and desire is constant, so we can study at all times, since it is also a desire and an invocation of the truth. He extends beyond that, and he speaks to the work of night. He says, sleep itself is a worker, a partner of the daily toil. We can make its forces serve us, utilize its laws, profit by that filtering process, that clarification which takes place during the self-surrender of the night. So in other words, using the time of night to reflect upon by way of reading, and maybe tying it back to what happened in the day.
So some of the things that, you may be thinking, could it be anything? Could we pick up a book on, let's say, astronomy, and this is a good thing? Again, yes, it goes back to intention, and God made the cosmos. And so, if you go at it with that in mind, it's going to be a good thing to.
Well, in fact, he even basically writes in his book, he says, tip, we must always be on alert to encounter the truth. Be present, learn to look, truth is everywhere. So you mentioned like this book on, a book on astronomy.
Right.
I mean, obviously astronomy, we cannot come to know God directly, right? Because none of us can actually see him directly, as in his, hopefully, we have our, at the time of our death, and we are able to enter the beatific vision, but we can come to know God through the created things. And so, astronomy, I may have mentioned this previously in some segment, but one of my former colleagues at the university, who was a professor of electrical engineering, very devout Catholic, he's still alive, and he and I were talking one day about 25 years ago, and he was telling me, he said, it's just amazing sometimes when I'm giving a lecture and I'm going through various equations, and like I had this aha moment, which I know is by the Holy Spirit. And and in my mind I'm thinking, wow, God, that's how you did it.
And so, we greatly appreciate, the thoughts on this, because as we, move forward into our week, I think the immediate goal for everyone is, okay, today, what are you going to read for 20 minutes? Today, what time in prayer, how are you going to spend that for the next 20 minutes? So focus on today. You have 40 minutes. That's your homework. So you got 20 minutes of spiritual reading, 20 minutes of prayer, and it can only, grow from there. And that's really what we want to do. And I had mentioned, before that, Father, Solange talked about, if you want to escape the sad effects of old age, go ahead and expand your intellectual will. Well, he died at the age of 85, so he probably was doing something right. So for those folks who want to grow old gracefully, that's how you do it.
Well, thank you. And remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Live through time, pass through.